Right. Good morning to everyone. I am Jasdev Singh Rai, Director of Citizen Rights Group. This is a small workshop in preparation for our position at the COP26, which will take in Glasgow later on this year. We have a slightly what may be perceived as radical position or a different position which we think will complement the current attempts to deal with the climate change that has occurred. We feel that without the active engagement of civil society, the whole climate issue will not be addressed successfully. States on their own can introduce any number of policies. They can they can introduce laws, they can change their own policies or meta policies, but in the end, if people are not passionately involved with the whole climate issue, then I don't think we can see this proceeding very far. In the end, it is civil society which is most affected, and what we have found in our understanding and looking at and analyzing various countries and people is that the climate issue is very robust in Europe and some Western countries where there are extremely active movements, but it lacks the same sort of amount of passion in many other countries. We looked at why this was so, and it seemed that it may have been that the whole climate debate seems to work from one civilization's perspective. It can engage civil society from one aspect, but it doesn't seem to encourage the civil society in other countries to be proactively taking ownership of the environment or the climate issues. It was in that with that in mind that we started the Worldviews of Nature project to look at how different civilizations work with or have conceptual frameworks in relation to different aspects of nature, to environment, to other species, to other human beings. And we found that there were some fundamental differences. Whereas the Western approach is very much a state-orientated approach and can trace most of its philosophy to Judeo-Christian thinking. We found that, and it can be quite anthropocentric. In many other civilizations, the relationship between humans and other species, environment, and climate is not so anthropocentric based, and if our attempts to address the climate issue were more pluralistic in our approach from both the state and international perspective, then we think that civil society in the rest of the world will start taking ownership and be more active in addressing this. At the moment, it seems to be a preoccupation of some middle-class activists in many countries. It hasn't percolated down to society in general. and it's very important that society in general, in most countries, become active in this climate issue, because it's the most dangerous threat affecting humankind now. As we see every year, the number of floods increasing, the number of earthquakes increasing, heat waves increasing, and it's becoming obvious even to those who are climate deniers that the climate is an issue in where we are moving to. Our resources are limited, and we cannot keep on pretending that we can get more resources from somewhere. We cannot keep on pretending that somehow we will build new technology that will save us from the crisis that is looming. We have to change our approaches, our attitudes, our consumption, and of course the damage we do to the climate. The question, of course, is what encourages an individual to be engaged in taking steps to redress the climate. What encourages a society to take steps to address the climate issue? And with that in mind, we looked at some other civilizations. We had some very useful workshops in Durban on the classic traditional Ubuntu perspectives, which was quite refreshing and different than the perspectives that the international community adopts. We had some workshops in India, in Varanasi and Pune, and looked at some of the Hindu perspectives and traditional perspectives from Indian civilization, which again were quite different. We have had some inputs from Far East, from Thailand, Cambodia, again, which were quite interesting, and from South American indigenous people, which again were quite remarkable and eye-opening, both in their depth of understanding of nature, the steps they take normally in their practices, daily prayers, and how they try to preserve the climate. Hence the nature of this project. We hope that we will be able to have a couple of sessions at COP26 and try and change attitudes there as well for the international community to take a more pluralistic approach to addressing the climate. We have a few speakers here today bringing different perspectives, and I will pass on the rest of the session to Daryl. We have our first speaker, Meenakshi, who will pass it on to her. Right?
Thank you.
Okay, so my question is...
I just go to it. That's a very good question that you asked, because I was always trying to look at what's the difference between a human rights approach and values-based approach. And I tried to read a lot on this, and I got the answer from Sri Ravi Shankar Ji from Bangalore. He mentioned very clearly that human rights cannot work unless you have compassion. And compassion is, human rights is nothing but compassion. And compassion comes from spirituality and the values that we have. So, to me, whenever I read on human rights, it looks like it is our right to get something. But how do we think about other people's rights? Why, when human rights is still on, why do people lack water? It's because of lack of compassion. So I would not go from human rights perspective as much as I do on values or on spirituality. And that's why I said I'm not an expert with human rights. To me, human rights will work if compassion is there. Otherwise, it won't work. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting take you. I mean, I agree with. I mean, I understand the take your mode of thinking, because value-based approach are not necessarily anthropocentric in themselves. They are more broader than that. Yeah. So your chain of thought, if I understand clearly, is more from a very anthropocentric view of human beings at the heart of deciding a value, what is a value and what an objective value that you can put to a product or a body of nature. So
I had the same
what is it about? I want to deconstruct it a bit.
The some of the bioethical dilemmas that we are facing here is because people say that they have their own perspective on their values, and each culture has their own values.
But what is the value? That's the starting point. How I want you to define what do you understand by a value?
Okay. Now,
not
what
right, but value.
Okay. Now, I'm talking about universal values that keep us together. Why are we not fighting and killing each other now? There is a certain amount of understanding now that we have and respect for human life. And we have certain basic values of respecting each other, values of respecting a life. We have values of love. That's a big value by itself, and we can't negate saying that there's no love in the world. So there are some set of universal values that apply to us today. Otherwise, the world won't exist. So I'm now saying that universal values are very important. And human rights have to come from these values.
But what is a value?
Pardon?
What is a value?
What is the value?
There are so many values. For example, if you look at it, if you go into okay, now I'm speaking when it's human values based program, we use 5 basic values: love, truth, right conduct, peace, and non-violence. So these are universal in all countries, and so this program seemed to be helpful for us.
Yeah. What I was trying to get out of you was a definition of, in your understanding, what constitutes a value. For me, value is a measure of the thought that is accepted by society as a proof of conduct by people in certain set of environments.
It's interesting.
So
it's interesting.
I just wanted you to deconstruct what do you define a value for you. For me, that is a value. A measure of conduct that is decided by the society for you to be expected to be behavior or having some moral set of conducts. So that's what I wanted you to say. Because it's interesting what you're saying. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, but I just wanted to get something out of you telling me, how do you see what a value is?
Okay, you said something about thought, right? Now you define value as measure of thinking, right?
That's one way of looking at value.
Okay, now measure of thinking comes from your mind, whereas spiritual values come from the heart. If you look at environmental education now, they talk about head, heart and hands. If this approach is there, then our environment will be positive. But if you look at only thinking, that is where our education system is heading to, just lots of information, then we can't speak from our heart. And that is where compassion starts. So that's why I prefer to talk about spirituality, which values can come.
No, that's absolutely. I just wanted you to get me the definition that I was doing.
I understand. Yes, because there's a lot of different opinions.
There's a philosophical basis for having principles, values. Those two are quite different approaches in philosophy to take. So, because medicine is more about principles, not necessarily, unless you go into the realm of feminism, then you don't have values attached to medical ethics as much as principalism is talked about. Then when you took rights-based approach, I said, why is that? But it's interesting, I got it. Thank you.
So I'd like to, the title of the book the famous book, is universalism and ethical values for the environment. So we need to also ask Jasdev what is the values, and also I give some comment, because section 1.3 says, are there universal values that can be agreed upon across the cultures of the world? So again, it tries to go into what are the values, and whether or not these are values. And then chapter 2 was on ethical principles. That the value like love, or the value like why is something more appreciated than another, so yeah, there's often not so much of a distinction, I think, in our common language. That a rights-based approach, or a relational-based approach, or a value-based approach, these may all be different perspectives on what are values. Also, so I wonder, Jasdev, would you like to make some reflection on values? What are values?
Yeah, I think values are very much culturally based on how we see things. You know, we may, in some perspectives, you might say certain ethics or the system of rights is a value. When we often hear in Britain about British values, and nobody's been able to describe what these values are, how they are different, let us say, the values of Indian people or Chinese people, or the British less likely to go and beat somebody than a Chinese person is or Indian person is. We don't quite understand what they just call a distinct values, but then that is how, let us say, the British see it more in terms of the rights of others as a value. Whereas from an Indian perspective, the respect of another person might be seen as a value, where we see that other people have dignity, and that's a value, that they are simply another extension of us, and everything is interconnectedness. So an Indian value system may have a slightly different perspective, but the end point is the same, of respecting dignity and respecting others. When we looked at this in terms of environmental issues and ethical values, the question was how do we describe the concept of value in that? From an anthropocentric perspective, we will see value as custodians, and seeing that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to ensuring that the other species and biodiversity is maintained. Whereas again, an Indian or a Ubuntu perspective may be very different, in which we value the other not because we are custodians or we have the authority to be good or bad to them. It's because we see them as all forms or manifestation of the same one. People call it God or eternal, etc. In which case then our ethics are inspired by a very different system. In Ubuntu also there is an interrelationship between human beings and the environment and other beings, and that value system is slightly different. And what do they value the other thing as? Those are things we were trying to point out, that the word value and ethics is very much culturally based, very much based on what the philosophy is from which you are extrapolating. What do you think, Nina?
No, I think the basis for value is definitely cultural.
Yeah.
And
imbibed.
sorry?
Values are imbibed from your childhood,
Yes.
the way you're taught,
The-
the way you look at, the way you learn, and then you cultivate a value in you. Okay, I'm going to be committed. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that. That's the value that I think. The inbuilt value in yourself.
Well,
It varies from person to person.
it does. And in my values, although I'm Hindu, I'm Indian, I'm a British Indian, but not necessarily we'll have the same values.
Not necessarily.
Not necessary. There is something cultural thread in the value system, the way values get organized in society, in families, or how they originate.
Like family,
Exactly,
it varies
how
from
they
family
originate.
to family.
Varies from family to family. Our values are slightly different from your values, but the commonality is, yes, the foundation
There is
may
a
be
commonality.
similar. Yeah, there is a foundation that may be similar. That could be cultural or cultural foundation. It could be religious foundation. It could be class foundation for that. So whatever the foundation for the values could be, but having the we take our example, our values, as I said, could be different from person to person, from family to family. Yes, there is commonality. The foundation may be similar, the way they are expressed, utilized, and objectively defined in our day-to-day practice may be slightly different.
I'd like to.
That's how I feel as a person. That yes, I'm Indian. I have a certain set of state foundation growing up. Probably 1 billion people in India, but maybe how I practice my values might be slightly different from person to person and place where I'm.
It is in you. So,
Yes.
for example, say talking about truth. So, a person who has been taught from the childhood that you must speak the truth, they continue to speak the truth. Cheating,
Well, also-
not cheat anybody.
Yeah.
No, these are something. These values they are put it into you,
Yes,
your
indeed.
system sort of
Yes.
thing.
That's why I'm saying there is commonality to the foundation and the origins of value, definitely, but how they are being implied and practiced change. As,
It is susceptible to changes.
So it changes as people grow up and become more rationalistic human beings. So day to day their environment would change their values, not completely, but to a certain degree.
Yes, that is also
Yeah,
possible.
so I think that's, after coming to the UK, I'm sure I've changed quite a lot. I was quite different in Japan and now I've quite changed probably.
So I'd like to answer the question of values by the flowers here. The story about the beautiful flowers. So, as an illustration of universal value, does everybody enjoy the flowers on Skype? And all around the world, every continent now, we have people looking at these flowers, the same flowers. So this was a common value.
Did you like it? I picked it up from the garden.
Yeah, and so in fact, thank you, Lakshmi, for picking the flowers, because we had an image of how to make a nice background for a video, and you immediately said, shall I go pick some flowers? And I had two thoughts initially. One is, yes, the flowers are lovely, and the second is the flowers are great in nature, but the fact that there's around 10,000 daffodils out in the garden means these are not going to be missed, and actually people can really use this. So that's an illustration, universal values, why a flower is appreciated. It also happens that the bottom of this is water. You put water for the flowers to drink. So that links
That is
to
value.
yeah.
That is value.
So the water is there, that's a universal value, but based on water. Interesting again why we enjoy flowers, the colour. It lifts our spirit, health-wise.
Good for the eyes.
Good for the eyes. If somebody goes, it smells quite nice. If somebody wants to visit somebody in hospital, we used to bring flowers, even though sometimes now the hospitals may say no, but that's very unfortunate value that has changed, because I think flowers make people healthier. So that's an illustration. Our love of life is to bring life also to us, and occasionally you can enjoy flowers. My mother always said, don't give flowers to me when I'm dead, give flowers to me from my garden when I'm alive, because it's no sense, you can't appreciate it when you're dead. In fact, it's sort of a waste. So there we are, we've got flowers here. How do you think, is that an illustration of value? And the same, we talked about health today. Health is a value in itself, both objectively as a scientific concept, whether it be physical health, mental health, spiritual health. But it's also something which we strive to achieve, and something which we also consider as a right to health. So do we have a right to see a flower? It's not in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it is actually something which I think people do have a right to. We're listening now to the birds outside. They're joining in our conference here. Any reflections?
I think this discussion has become quite kind of philosophical, so it's easy to get kind of lost in a different train of thought. It's looking at the practical applications of what we're discussing. So it was on the basis of the presentation about our rights to water and how it's connected to the environment. I think it's all well and good forming a kind of a consensus on the definition of a value, but what's the practical application once we have the definition? There's so many ways to approach it. One was the way that Suma did in the presentation. There's a religious, spiritual aspect of it. There's an ethical aspect. There's a human rights perspective. It's trying to look for a common thread or commonality which would allow everyone to come to a consensus with how water is accessed, shared, and utilised. So I think that's the key part of the discussion, which is I think lacking often, and it's difficult to come to that kind of conclusion.
And also Suma's experience of teaching as an illustration that children can understand. Water is quite critical. Now, it happens maybe in England now you got rain almost every day, so water is still appreciated, but maybe people complain they'd like the sunshine, whereas in Arizona or California we have water shortage, so we really appreciate water. Sukran's coming from Turkey, where water is also an issue. And Sukran, you had a question. Would you like to ask it, please? And Atanasio, also you have a question in Mozambique. Would you like to ask a question? Atanasio? Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Ojanum, please, you have a question? Go ahead.
Just a moment.
That's right. Just
Athanasio's question is...
I have some question.
Yes, June?
Just a moment.
Okay.
I can't close my...
Okay, Jun will have to reconnect. Atanasio, would you like to speak your question? The question was, what's the issue of water in a spiritual perspective in which the principles are based on animism or Zanimism? And then Jun, and please go ahead too.
Thank you.
You go ahead.
Thank you very much for giving your presentation. I have some question. What did you find your presenting compared to previous study? And second is like your PPT. Who is responsibility for lack of necessary water or flood water? And third is what is philosophy of water? Thank you.
Okay, Suma, go ahead.
Yeah, can you just tell me the question again? Come up with the question again?
So
because I think it's not loud enough for me.
Who has responsibility
First
for...
is, what did you find compared to previous study? Second is, who is responsibility for lack of water or polluted water? And third is, what is the philosophy of water?
What is that?
Philosophy of water.
Philosophy of water.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first one you asked, who's responsible? I think everyone is responsible. But policy making, I think they need to bring environment into education as a major subject in education itself, because though we claim that we're doing environmental education through science and technology, the issues, the bioethical issues that we face today is not being stressed even from primary education, yes, unless they see it from the point of view from examination, and it doesn't bring the whole world together. It just talks about some local issues, and children are not able to understand or how to respect nature, and this respect and love will come only through spiritual education, if you ask me, because so many of them are living in urban areas. We also looked at people facing water problems in urban cities and rural. There was a small case study that was done, and teachers, there was a classroom teacher, I'll just give you an example. She asked them to draw chicken for art class, and the child actually drew a chicken drumstick. He did not draw an animal, yes, because when you call it sea chicken, they immediately connect to something that they know. And what they know is the chicken drumstick that they eat. It shows they are close, how far they have come distant from nature. They may have seen chicken through pictures, but what I'm trying to say is there is a kind of, there are also studies that shows that children lose sensitivity from nature when you keep them away from nature. Yes, because whatever is in nature is what we find in our body. Yeah. So policy making should, in education, they should bring back environment as a major subject. The second question, the philosophy of water. I don't know, it could be very big, but to me it's very simple. We teach children what are the values you see in water, because water is in our body. And it's amazing that children say that water has no size or shape, it adapts itself. In fact, one of the poster art that they did, they showed water in two different glasses and said water adapts itself. And so if water can adapt in different shapes of containers, why can't we as human beings adapt ourselves? I find that when it comes to adults, they find it more difficult to change, because we start talking about whose values they are. But with children, it's very easy because they immediately look at the beauty of nature and they're so innocent. So it's very easy to bring values-based water education with children. And in fact, I was in the school for 7 years. I took time to understand this, but I realized that children could come up faster with the understanding of cooperation and respect and love for nature. They were very quick, and something that I learned. I hope that given you the answer for this. I'm not sure about the philosophy of of water as such.
Thank you. Also,
Thank you so much.
yeah, go. Thank you, Jun. Sukra, you have some questions too?
Yeah. Hi everybody. It was a good conference. I want to say thank you for everybody. Suma, is your topic is also important. Sometimes I try to meditation, Kundalini Yoga. Yeah, I think it was named. But I want to curious about the spiritual. Are the spiritual studies useful enough to internalize the importance of water, to protect water resources, which is one of the life's most important resources? We need another way, another method, because water is very important for spiritual life, for physical life, and last famous coronavirus is also the scientists indicated that washing hand is very important. Yeah, if we be careful about it, we can protect ourselves. Therefore, do you have any other solution, or it is enough? But still, people are not aware to protect the water resources. Thank you.
Protection, I think, of water resources, first of all, our understanding and the of our own geographical location is very small. In fact, here in Selangor, in Kuala Lumpur, we have issues with water. I know that I myself didn't have water for 3 to 4 days near our housing area. It's very politically ruled. This is a very, I think they determine where the water goes. That is why I said policy making in education this should be a very strong topic on environment, so that these children could be future leaders. And to me, if you ask me, I think this kind of spiritual education is very important, making them understand where they come from, and major part of our body is water. 66 to 76, if you look online, we understand that water forms a major, and if water resource is not there, it's going to be very difficult for many people. Yes, so I'm not quite sure about answering your question on how to protect, because if we need to protect, it should start from young, not from as adults. The habits are all set and more difficult. Yeah.
Yes.
Very easy to help children to understand, so they have a better future. So that is why I thought that this thing should come into the curriculum. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, you are right. Thank you, I agree with you. Children will better understand the water importance. Yes, thank you. That's it, thank you.
Are there any other comments, reflections? Sorry?
That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Suma.
Yeah, my question is related to the presentation on issues of water and spirituality. Actually, when we think the issue of spirituality, the spirituality as it is rooted in different principles and different groups of faith or congregations, religious congregations, and traditions as well. So my question is, the presenter was saying that, or Suma was saying that our discussion related to the standard, the issue of water was based on a spiritual perspective. So my question was, which principle of spirituality that that was based on? Was it linked to a specific religious congregation or historical tradition of a given tribe or historical background? That is what my question is about. Thank you.
Thanks, Athanasios, for Suma. Yes, Suma? So you saw his questions before, the issue of water and spiritual perspective. Suma, any comments? Or any reflections? I think water has, as Suma presented, many aspects of spirituality. Its role in cleansing, in holiness, is interesting as well. So why is water universally seen as something to be clean in value? And in fact, Mariti's made a comment on Skype from the Philippines that she can live for a few days without electricity, but not for a single day without water. So it's really critical. And I think that aspect is critical for our sustainability. And if we look at the worldviews of nature, the value of water is high. And in fact, Suma also presented in the International Bioethics Survey in 1993. That was one of the common aspects was water. Suma, go ahead. Microsoft.
Yeah, but what are the two questions?
Yes. So in the repository of worldviews of ethical views of nature, this is something which stemmed from the work of Dr. Justify Singh and myself and Amara and Cecilia's report on the universalism and ethical views of nature. But as a consequence, we tried to develop worldviews of nature. And we had, the website is on the Bioethics Institute website. Now if we scroll down what we have at the moment from the Americas, we had an American-Indian Alternative Views of Nature by Italy Zent, Ancient Green Wisdom from the southwest of Yunnan, Yodi Ikal Jenny. We had something by Ramako Mestra Kaunala, Cultivated Plants, Elite Souls, the Jara Wara Garden. Then we had Napapi Footsteps, Bruce Albert, and Viva Sosangada, Quiet Life, the Kalenko Perception of Nature. So the idea of these entries was to try to start for a global repository of ethical worldviews of nature. In Asia, we have a Cambodian views of nature, Chinese views of nature, Talang Namak views of nature, Indonesia, Thai views of nature, and in Wuthering Heights, local perspectives on climate change from the Tibetan nomads who live at the top of the world. So these were examples from Asia. Then in India, we had a workshop, in fact, some years ago, to try and gather some perspectives and the implications of Saint Genevieve de Vida's philosophical thoughts, environmental concerns, and Guru Granit Sahib, environmental crisis and new interpreter of the RTA, nature as perceived in Sankhya philosophy, pro-environmental thoughts and actual practices in the Jain tradition, and views of environmental ethics in Saint Kabir's philosophy. Then for Europe we had something on Finnish views of nature, and we had various project participants. And the idea of this repository, which you can see from a picture again, is how we can get a space for people to share worldviews of nature. And I think in the COP meeting would be also an opportunity for people to share their views of nature and how to develop this further. We may want to, we had today perspectives on the Hindu perspective, we're going to hear from the Sikh perspective, and how can we gather under a common framework. So we have questions such as whether it be anthropocentric, biocentric, ecocentric, what view, is it cosmocentric, and so on. How much of these different elements do we see in the relationships between different communities of knowledge. And over time, are we becoming more anthropocentric, or are we becoming more ecocentric or biocentric? These are big questions for us as well, because I think we have to consider how we might change our perception with the impact of technology and the environment on people. And for example, we have new movements such as veganism, which we talked about. Yet, if we have a view that milk is the giver of life as versus water, then it would seem natural for us to have a view that it's good and healthy to have milk. That's why you have a ghee in your temples. We may also have, in some cultures, animal sacrifice as a way of making peace with God. So we sacrifice poor little lambs we saw pictures of because they're meant to be innocent, yet we can go ahead and sacrifice them. So that's also how this will affect our cosmology. Even in the event we talked about the festivals. So when somebody comes to visit you as a festival in some countries, they will go and kill an animal as a celebration of your visit, to be hospitable. We had in the ancient Aztec or Mayan religion, the killing of young virgins and taking a beating heart was a way to appease the gods. And even the giant pyramids in Mexico City are worshipping water gods, because water was very critical, but they used to appease the water gods by living human sacrifice. Well, they were no longer living after they were sacrificed. But this was a sort of interesting approach is how you can have in one religion the death is a way to appease God, and others it's holy not to. So how do we find this worldview of nature? And whether now we have a worldview of nature where the hamburger is a symbol of global holiness, that you'll give a hamburger, or a Kentucky Fried Chicken as a symbol of universalism. Yet we have movements against this. And even in people's own journey, they will have different versions of spirituality with periods of vegetarianism and veganism or meat eating and so on. So I think this is something which we need to describe and try and understand the way that we approach the environment and how do we define sustainability. As was pointed out before, if we can eat less meat, we will feed more people and preserve the environment more because of the very low energy efficiency, especially for beef. It's particularly bad, a 4 or 5% energy conversion and the rest is wasted. Whereas if we grain, it's good. Interestingly, eating pigs is much more healthy than for the environment than eating beef. Yet for Muslims, eating pigs is something out of the question. Okay? And of course, for eating large animals.
They eat camel, isn't it?
Yeah.
They eat camel.
Yes, they eat camels, they eat other animals, but certain animals are not kosher, let's say, or halal. And even the concept of these relationships. So there's also the focus which we'll explore tomorrow on diversity, which will be interesting. But the Worldviews of Nature is really a great repository of diversity. So gathering different perspectives together, but also been applying this to sustainability. So we also have a SDG curriculum, which we've been developing, where materials are gathered on the SDGs, and that's one of the objectives that we may also pursue when we have the meeting, is exploring more types of material of how these can be used for teaching about SDGs. So that is sort of a brief overview of some of the status of the Worldviews of Nature project that we started with UNESCO, Bioscience Institute, the Sikh Human Rights Group, and various academics and scholars, and that really, how does it link to people's life? How does our worldview? And then we come back to a question which was raised before, on paper or in scripture or in our chanting, that we might chant in our space of the day which is holy. Yet when it comes to no longer being holy, we're going to go and defecate in the river, or we're going to pollute the water, or kill animals, or justify driving big cars, or using a lot of the environment. And just, we all have hypocrisies and things which are counter to our ideology in our life. And it's sort of, this is very interesting for our real worldviews of nature. And in bioethics, do we describe that view of nature based on the reality? We can look at people's footprint, their spiritual footprint, or their carbon footprint, or their ethical footprint, as opposed to their ideology. So let's say we come to our religious space once a week, then we will become very holy on that day, and then we forget about it for the rest of the week or the rest of the year. And also we saw here, actually it was interesting in this space today, there was a period out in the garden, which is beautiful, where all the young children were practicing some forms of physical movement, including traditional martial arts and being in tune with nature. But how many of them will apply that to changing the worldview of nature that's endemic in this country and around the world, which is often distancing ourselves from nature. So maybe we have some discussion or questions on this, but we also have a couple more presentations on universalism and then also on trying to put things together. Are there any comments or questions?
I just wanted to ask about the SDG, what about curriculum? So can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yes, I will. We have so from a repository Worldviews of Nature, we also have a perspective on the SDG curriculum, and I'm going to go to the Bioscience Institute website, which I can find from history here. And on the Bioscience Institute history, we then, up top is the SDG Curriculum resources. So if we scroll here, we see the SDG Curriculum for Sustainable Development is here. And we can go through different materials, and we can link to different videos from SDGs, poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequality, sustainable cities and communities, 12 responsible consumption and production, 13 climate action, 14 life below water, 15 life on land, 16 peace, justice and strong institutions, and 17 partnerships for the goals. And we have various links to videos on sustainability. So each of these, we are trying to produce materials as another project between the Sikh Human Rights Group and the Bioscience Institute and other partners on the curriculum for the SDGs. So when also framing our discussion, it's another approach to frame in terms of SDGs, have a Hindu perspective or a Sikh perspective on particular SDGs, on how we can do this.
What is this?
Okay, so I think, so that's some perspectives, I think. Maybe we should move on.
Okay.